I'm absolutely thrilled to have recently had the opportunity to interview the Emmy Award-winning international speaker and powerhouse, Elliot Kotek, while in the city of LA. Not only is Elliot an Aussie expat, but he's also the visionary founder and CEO of the Nation of Artists, a production company that creates truly inspiring and purpose-driven documentary-style content for some of the world's most leading companies, including the likes of Aflac. If you're looking to learn about how to live a truly meaningful life, find fulfillment in your career, and to gain a renewed sense of hope in the world, then this interview is absolutely essential viewing for you. Don't miss out on a chance to gain valuable insights and inspiration from one of the world's greatest speakers.
I love that I'm here with you in LA. Obviously, we've known each other a long time. Met in New York, 20-something years ago. So, yeah, this is super nice.
Yes, and for those of you, just to set the stage a little bit, Elliot and I have known each other for, I guess, 25 years right now, and Elliot has known my wife, who is behind the camera right now, for what, since...
No, we're not going to talk about how long because she's only 21 years old.
Okay.
So, I don't know, technically, but a while. We've known each other since we were, I think, 4.
Oh my gosh, wow. That's a very, very long time. So, I want to bring my first question to you is, there's always a fascination, I think, with Australians understanding what goes on in the US. And there is a feeling, and this is my opinion, that the US is a war zone. Everybody hates each other. Strife is enormous, and it is just frankly unsafe and going downhill. But I'd love for you, I know you're not a political person per se, but just to give Australians just some type of feel, what is the mood over here?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time. I mean, you have this distrust or this unwinding of democratic values. You have a system that gets stuck at every turn politically, where party games are sometimes much more important than people's rights and lives.
Yeah.
And that's a really disappointing place to be in. And we've seen that for some time, not just with the current last couple of administrations. And everyone was hoping it'd get a little better with Biden coming in because he was known for having a bipartisan approach to things. And I think there has been some success in the last 2 years that, but it is still a very much a game, the political game that is being played out at a very high level. And with the news cycle as it is, it paints a very bleak picture politically.
Right.
Yeah.
And look, it's certainly something that we don't necessarily have a lot of control over at this point, but let's talk about something that you do have some control over. What right now gets you out of bed in the morning? What are the projects that motivate you?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a very busy last decade or so, and so we're always involved in a bunch of projects, and we only do projects that have some sort of social impact or value. And so at the moment we've been working with Habitat for Humanity and
Right.
their relationship with Whirlpool, who are known for making fridges and range irons and stuff like that. But Whirlpool also own KitchenAid and a whole
Right.
bunch of other brands, Maytag. But what Whirlpool has done for the last 20 plus years is supply every oven and fridge to Habitat for Humanity homes in the US. They also have a massive presence elsewhere. But we've been helping them and Habitat talk about various issues that are around affordable housing, which is not just a national crisis here, but an international crisis at the moment, where we talk about building climate resilient housing and how important that is, to build more energy efficient homes as well. And that's, those sorts of things are not political. Yes, climate science can be a political subject, but at the heart of it, it's like if you can help people save money by installing solar, or help them get off grid if they're that way inclined,
Sure.
You can tell a story that appeals to pretty much anyone. But if they want to do the right thing going forward, there is going to be some sort of acceptance of renewable energy, right? And so we've been working with them, with the United Nations Development Program, and a relationship with Hyundai, or Hyundai as we call it in Australia.
Yes.
Who got together on this incredible journey to build a platform called For Tomorrow, which is all about grassroots innovators all around the world, how people who are seeing problems firsthand have the power to solve those problems, and certainly should be listened to when considering how to solve some of these major issues of our time. There's this mentality around innovation coming from central places like institutions or big tech,
Right.
but this project and this platform and the content that surrounds it really focuses on the people who can solve these things from a grassroots basis, so bottom up.
Right.
So there are a couple, and then we've been working on a big documentary about the power of purpose, how we each find our purpose via different catalytic events.
Right.
Sometimes tragedy, sometimes family, sometimes our careers, sometimes through spirituality.
Right.
But not only is that good for us in terms of just a general way of being, but then we also balance those stories out with scientists, genomics experts, neurosurgeons, hard scientists, as well as behavioral psychologists who are looking at the power of purpose on our brains and our bodies, using hardcore metrics, and the science seems to be undeniable that if we have purpose in our lives, that we'll actually live longer.
Well, you have, obviously, and we can get into it, have an incredibly eclectic background, including, I believe, you studied pharmacology back in university, so you've come a long way around it there. But just staying on the topic for a second, I'm just curious, I believe with purpose, it's more important and often confused with happiness.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. This was like one of the issues. It's not really like we're really done with the film. It's like it's almost complete at the minute.
You don't have to tell us too much, but
yeah,
but you can give us a little bit of it.
That's the cool thing about a project like that, is that I get to do dozens, maybe like 45 interviews or so, or thereabouts, each of an hour and a half duration or more. And certainly if you include the research interviews and things like that, I get the benefit of all that knowledge.
A couple hundred hours before you know it.
And then the final product is only like 65 minutes, so obviously some things get left out. But this pursuit of happiness versus the pursuit of purpose is a very huge distinction that I could talk for hours about, so I won't. But just to say that some people are super engaged by something that maybe isn't happy.
Right.
And so I like to sometimes it's something happy that engages you, and oftentimes it is. But if you are a counselor who helps kids through their journeys with mental illness,
right,
it might be incredibly satisfying.
Yeah.
But it's not happiness inducing.
I can imagine, especially when they call you and say, I'm about to, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and so, but you can feel at the end of the day a massive sense of purpose,
right,
fulfillment, engagement. And it's those sorts of things, especially when it's done for the benefit of others, which is a eudaimonic sense of purpose.
Right.
It's called, as opposed to hedonistic or hedonic sense of purpose, which is for the self.
Okay.
Things that you're doing to better your own situation for you.
Right.
But a eudaimonic sense of purpose, where you're doing things for others,
yeah, or
for the benefit of others, has an incredible biological response within us that
really
ramps up the production of antibodies and antivirals, decreases inflammation in our systems.
I've got a lot of inflammation.
Yeah.
Maybe I have no purpose.
Because if you think about it from thousands of years ago, if we had a purpose, like even to take it back to, caveman times.
Sure.
If you have and you know it probably from playing a game super intensely, or if you're doing some project really with intention and purpose, that little things disappear, like little aches and pains go away.
Yes.
And it's not just because you're so focused that mentally you're blocking everything else out. It's because your body will donate resources to the places that need them for that period of time to help you achieve that goal. So your body is actively fighting off those things in order to help you achieve your goals, right? So it's in your best interest to be motivated by something.
Right.
And our culture, you could say, especially in the US, often deals with and focuses on behaviors like exercise and diet.
Right.
But if you focus more on motivators, like the things that provide you with meaning, then you're much more likely to get up at the beginning of a day. you're much more likely to make healthy food choices to sustain you during the
Sure,
day.
that makes sense.
You're much more likely to go out and meet with other people and do these other things. So this exercise and diet will potentially follow the motivating factor.
I see, yes.
So maybe as a narrative, societally, we should spend more time looking at motivators and
Right.
asking people what their purpose is, which we don't do, even though it is so fundamental to who we are, versus focusing so much on diet and exercise specifically.
Right. And so I guess, with the purpose thing, obviously you're very much into the arts and into filmmaking. So a project like this, I'm curious, how does it, and I'm sure we could spend the entire interview discussing it, but in a nutshell, how does it come about from maybe your mind, or how does it go from one place to the next?
Yeah, we've got lucky on this one. So we're known, so my company's called The Nation of Artists.
Yes.
And so we're known for producing purposeful content.
Okay.
And content that engages on a different level, and has that intention behind it. Our motto is ideas plus empathy equals impact.
Okay.
Right? So we're already known in that space. And in this case, it was a non-profit called AARP, which you probably have heard of. But AARP has about 38 million members in the US. It's one of the biggest non-profits probably in the world.
Yeah.
It has a magazine that prints, I believe, about 2 million copies per issue, which makes it probably the most printed magazine, most circulated magazine in the world.
None of that.
And they host every year a Purpose Awards ceremony.
Okay.
And during the pandemic, they couldn't hold that gala event or gala event, right? And so instead they thought, oh, well, let's make a documentary about purpose this year instead of doing the gala. And so they reached out. We'd done a project or had a project in the works before. I did a piece with them where we, with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right. The famous Laker, LA Lakers.
Let me just pause it for a second. For those of you, again, who don't know Elliot, the list of people that he has worked with, as he just mentioned, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, more young people may know Carmelo Anthony as an example. The list goes on and on of people that you've worked with, but sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, the projects attract different people, right? And it's always an incredible collaboration. And as you can appreciate, in the world of documentaries and other branded content and things like that, having power of celebrity is very real. So, but so ARP asked me to help them with the project with Kareem. And that was a dream come true for me, given that I was a junior basketball player way back when.
The Lakers in the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. The Lakers in the 80s. And so when they wanted this project done, we started talking about it, and it kind of came to me and evolved from there. And in the film are people like Deepak Chopra, right, whose thoughts and feelings about the combination between psychology and wellness preceded or predated our ability to track those things with metrics, with hardcore technology. And now that we have MRIs and all these other amazing technological advances, we can actually see that a lot of what he said was true. Sanjay Gupta, who's CNN's medical correspondent, but also an active neurosurgeon. A lot of people don't appreciate that he's still a brain surgeon, actively. He's in the film. It's narrated by Debbie Allen, who was in the Fame movies recently. Recently got the Governor's Award at the Emmys, and is on Grey's Anatomy and is a showrunner of that show and executive producer of that show as well. So that's really come together nicely. Right.
So you're constantly, I suppose, in search of not just films, but also you write a lot as well. Is that correct? But something that has some type of social impact?
Yeah, it has to either inspire, engage, or have really almost measurable impact. So where budgets allow, tracking the impact that it has, or we have all these different formulas for how we approach impact. We have an approach called internal, external, eternal, where we look at who are the partners internally, who are the partners externally, helping you either have reach with the project or helping the effect of the project. And then eternal, what's the transparency around that? How are you being held accountable to what you're saying? Can you invest and keep it sustainable for a couple of years post? Because normally people put out a project and then move on to the next thing.
Right, sure.
But where possible, we like to try and track things later and see what impact they're having.
And over the time that you've been doing this, because you've really been involved, 20 years, but especially in the last, say, 10 years, have you found yourself even more convinced of social impact, or do you get frustrated? Because I know a lot of people in that world get extremely frustrated as well.
Definitely not frustrated. Okay. I think the only thing, my personal motto is more, bigger with good people. Right. We love what we do. We just want to do more of it. Saying. We want to do it bigger and have more and more impact, and we only want to work with good people.
Right.
And with social impact, it's the words for it keep changing. The nomenclature always changes. The current adoption is ESG, right? So environmental, social. And so the way that companies approach these issues, social issues, environmental issues, etc., really has been under attack a little bit from a financial market standpoint. But it's not just my opinion. It seems to be the way of the world that if you invest in the impact revolution, then you're going to be a more resilient company. You're going to create a better culture. You're going to be more agile. You're going to show greater vision. You're going to get greater engagement out of your employees, your customer base, your supply chain, etc. And overall, you're going to perform better. There's some incredible stats out of Forbes that I think to the extent that companies that have a sense of purpose and can display and communicate that sense of purpose outperform the markets.
Right. And is that where they come to you as well, is a company as a Whirlpool? And again, I think that some of you may know Whirlpool, some of you may not, but there's a good chance you have a Whirlpool product in your house. But do they come to you and say, this is, it could seem a little bit, I suppose, unauthentic to say, I want to find a purpose. But is it that they already have it and they just don't know how to display it?
Yeah, that's a really good insight, is that oftentimes, and most companies, almost all, have had a sense of purpose, certainly when they started.
Yeah.
Right? They was trying to solve something or provide something that wasn't currently on the market, right? But then they also, just by way of being, who their founders were, who their leads within, who the most influential staff members were. Right. They had something that they believed in that was greater potentially than just the name of the organization and the product that they were selling, right? And so, so with Whirlpool, a lot of the times there's purpose consultants or people like me who come in and we look at what they've been doing already innately, and just that's inherent in their nature. And I think the best example of that, well, for Whirlpool, it couldn't be seen as a stunt because they've been doing it for 20 years and invested so much money in it. And similarly, we work with an insurance company called Aflac, which is really huge in the US, huge in Japan.
Yes.
Doesn't exist in Australia, but this insurance company had been donating money to childhood cancer initiatives for 20 years, over $120 million. But by the time that they engaged in this project that we got involved with, which was called My Special Aflac Duck, which is a social robot for kids going through chemotherapy, going through cancer treatment, and this incredible robot. But by the time they got to this thing that they created, it couldn't be seen as a stunt because they'd invested so heavily in all the other facets of childhood cancer initiatives and research and supporting local hospitals and wings and things like that in terms of childhood cancer and blood disorders. And so it's really important that when those companies come to either purpose consultants, so I work with someone named Carol Cohn, who's considered the godmother of cause marketing. Okay. And she comes up with some incredible concepts herself. But when she introduced this project to me and brought me on board, it was amazing. It was, and she was looking at the company and saying, look, what do you organically do that you haven't sought attention for, but that people should know about. Because it used to be the time when people did things that were philanthropic within a company,
Right.
that it was considered too boastful or prideful to talk about.
Right.
That if you were going to engage in philanthropy, you shouldn't really be talking about it. Otherwise, it's not genuine.
Yes.
It's kind of like Larry David donating anonymously to something, but wanting everyone to know who,
Right.
who made the donation, right? But it was that times have changed because as a society, as consumers, as potential employees,
Yes.
as potential contractors, we want to buy from, work for, etc., companies that have this greater sense of commitment to us and the planet, and that's a hardcore number, right? Like whether it's 90% of people will swap to buy something that they consider to be more beneficial to the planet than some other product, but there's all these various stats that can be found in relation to our willingness to consume things from companies that are better for the planet. And so as a result, we need to be telling our stories as companies in order to attract that talent to come work for us, in order to distinguish ourselves in the marketplace versus our competitors, etc.
Right, so that's a great insight about how the being boastful versus more matter of fact talking about it, because I think all of us, and I personally have noticed in Australia especially, a lot of Australians compared to Americans, and it's a gigantic stereotype, are less likely to talk about their accolades. It's
a funny thing. It's like there's that tall poppy syndrome that Australians are kind of famous for. I think it's probably a British thing too, and the Kiwis have it too. But it's this, we don't want to stick out. Like we don't want to put ourselves above anyone else. We like coming home and our friends giving us shit.
Right.
And we wouldn't have it any other way.
Fair enough.
And it's so endemic though. I think it works against Australians here unless they learn how to adopt to it. Because what happens is in Australia, if we're in a job interview situation, for example, we'll say we're okay at something when we're actually really, really good at it.
Yes.
And likewise, like it applies even when we're talking about the weather, right? It's a little wet outside. It's probably a torrential downpour, right?
Absolutely.
It's just we have a different nature about us, whereas Americans are often called upon to speak up early and loudly in order to get noticed. It's a much more competitive atmosphere, but that happens when you have 300 million people versus
25 million.
Yeah. So it's a different world. And so here, if you say you're the best at something, and you'll hear a lot of people talk about how they've mastered stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, I mastered that. Oh, I mastered that. Oh, I'm ready for the next thing because I mastered that. Now, of course, they haven't mastered it. So you kind of bring it down a bit. You hear what they... So if an Australian comes over here and says, oh, I'm okay at that, and then that gets discounted, it means you're probably terrible at it. So the perception is different. So we have to adopt and say, actually, I'm really good at this thing. Right, so that we get at least the benefit of the doubt.
Definitely.
It's weird.
We spoke about purpose a lot, and we've spoken already. Maybe bringing it back a little bit, because you have an incredibly interesting past. You started out as a lawyer. Can you just talk to us a little bit about that? Because then we'll take it into how you found your purpose.
I did science law at Monash. I went to work at 2 law firms. The first one was Gaydon's, and then Arnold Bloch Liebler.
Right.
And then I moved to the US, and it was, I needed to get sponsored to work in the US. So
I remember.
So I was looking to write for different publications, but to get sponsored, I ended up taking a job at another law firm in the US. And then at the same time, I was enrolled in theatre school to pursue my writing.
But this isn't just any law firm. Just tell us a little bit, because now you're doing exactly what you say. You don't like what Australians do, which is you're downplaying it. What law firm were you at?
Yeah, I at the time
I'm going to hold you to it. I was now.
Lucky. Yeah, it was like I was lucky at the time, right? Like a lot of law firms needed staff. It was early 2000s, and so I got quite a few offers, and was sleeping on your couch at the time.
Yes.
So where it was. But then I ended up taking a job at Morgan, Lewis and Bockius, which is I think just now called Morgan Lewis, but it was the fourth biggest firm in the US.
Right. So this is a real firm, a real opportunity, and was this in your mind your dream come true, if you will? I mean, obviously, since you've always been a good student, you're a lawyer. Was this the place you seemingly thought you wanted to be back then when you were circa 21 years old?
No. I was happy, but I was always happy.
Right.
Like I was happy doing what I did.
But you didn't feel the sense of, wow, I'm in New York. I've got my law job at one of the biggest firms.
No, in fact, like I remember thinking about like even taking that job. I really wanted a law firm that I thought that wouldn't impose on my enjoyment of New York, right? Like I didn't.
So it's a means to an end.
There were a couple of other law firms that had much tougher reputations.
Yeah.
That I knew I would have to sacrifice holidays, maybe some personal relationships.
Right.
I was told stories about people missing best friends' weddings and things like that to work there, but that they were very highly compensated. So I did not take the highest paycheck I was offered, and I didn't take the most intense, probably like the more prestigious firm potentially
Right.
that I was offered either. Because part of me moving to the US was specifically to explore some things that I probably didn't think or feel like I had the license to explore in Australia.
Yeah.
Because in Australia, growing up in communities where people know you,
Sure.
especially in Melbourne or Sydney, where you do everything in the same city. Like in the US, right? You graduate from high school and you go off to a completely different city
Sure.
where people don't know you. And so you can create yourself in any way you shape or form. But in Australia, like I'd gone to schools in Melbourne,
Right.
universities in Melbourne. I'd worked my retail jobs in Melbourne.
Yes.
And I had played sports in Melbourne. So all my groups were in the same place, and they all knew me to be a certain person and to pursue certain things. And so part of me going to the US was initially just for like what was going to be like 2 years
Right.
of like really just enjoying all that New York had to offer professionally, but also like giving me an opportunity to explore my writing, because I'd always been a writer, but it was always something that I did on the side. I had a cafe on a Saturday or Sunday morning with my, a pen and a pad, and wrote long form, and I used to write screenplays and plays that people never saw.
Interesting. So, because for those of you who don't know, you went to Melbourne High School, and I believe you need to qualify, is that right, to get into Melbourne High School?
Yeah.
So you were always had a sense of academic achievement, probably from the time you could actually think about it.
Yeah.
But yet you still had this streak inside of you that said, I don't want to be necessarily the cufflink lawyer.
Yeah, I did. I do really like cufflinks. I don't wear them so much anymore, except at people's weddings and things. That I really did like. I did like the suits and the ties and the cufflinks, and there was an allure to that, because also like I don't know, it was just there was a perception and a way you carry yourself, and I was very clean cut growing up. I didn't even like facial hair. I would shave every day, and so though it wasn't the hallmark of success for me wasn't becoming a lawyer. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the social aspect of it. I loved the people I worked with. I liked the firms that I was at. I liked the work that I did. I didn't hate anything.
Okay.
But what I found was the thing that unleashed like a passion.
And talk about that, because that's the purpose, if you will.
Right. Well, yeah, close. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a whole shtick about this too, right? It's like, for me, it's like purpose is an applied passion, right?
Wait, say that. Purpose
is an applied passion.
That's a great way to say it, because one of my questions was going to be, people will say, how do I find my purpose? I don't even know.
Yeah, or how do I find my passion? You hear that too, right?
Yes.
Like, I don't know what it is. But
All the
sometimes
time.
it's also enough to be associated with someone else's passion, right?
Yes.
If you get fulfillment out of that. And I don't take that off the table for people. Sometimes people say they need to find theirs. I say, well, you could find yours, or in the meantime, if you're really excited by someone else's, feel free to help them with theirs.
I think there's so much focus on leadership, and there's so much focus on being an entrepreneur and being your own boss, but there are not enough necessarily employees. And I know me personally, at times, there's a great advantage to being a number two.
Absolutely. I think that's really well stated. I think there is like an entrepreneur culture where people who don't really even know what that is will say that's what they want to be when they grow up. Right? Like
Yes.
they want to, like, there's obviously the influencer mindset that people want to be influencers, but there's also this idea that people want to be innovators or entrepreneurs without necessarily knowing what that entails.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's very well said, because but I think that not necessarily even being a number two, but a champion for something, or a manager, a project head, a lead, someone somehow engaged, right? And that's what we see a lot of in big tech in Silicon Valley, is that people who are following someone who has a great vision. Right. And like, yes, it can be done badly and it can be done amazingly well. Right, and you can throw out any number of names.
Right.
But these are people who've created some of the biggest companies of our time, and people who've created just really good businesses who we may not hear about every day.
Yeah, and last I checked at Google, there's more than just one employee.
Absolutely. In fact, I've had conversations with people who were amongst the first handful of people at Google who set up the early server infrastructure and things like that. Just incredible, anyway, so just incredible people who have had incredible lives since, because of what Google facilitated for them and that experience facilitated. But so just not to get confused by it, but really like coming back to this notion that if you have a passion for something, or you can see that you get excited by someone else's passion for something, and it's working towards something, then that application is a purpose.
Okay.
Like it's not your purpose. Like your purpose is something a bit bigger than that. It's a life aim. It's something that's not a goal-oriented thing. It's more esoteric. It's when you have a passion for something and can apply it, then that's the purpose, right? Like that's your purpose now.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
And then when you start telling people about your purpose, right, then that's when others come into the picture, right? If I tell you, oh, my purpose this year is to complete this documentary about these amazing jazz musicians at Preservation Hall in New Orleans. And I start telling people I really want to do this, then they tell other people who can help with it. Your network starts to grow. Your parents relay you to someone else's cousin's daughter's brother who wants to do the same thing to help you on it. You put it out online and people start getting connected to you. So once you have your passion and it's applied to a purpose, then you find your people. And once you have people, you have critical mass, and then anything is possible. So we like to call that the 4 Ps: passion, purpose, people, possibility. But not to be confused with the other project On Purpose, which is more about finding that North Star that you're working towards your whole life. It can change, but it's a different kind of a purpose. It's an organizing life aim that helps you decide what to do next in any situation.
Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense to me. Now, with leadership, you have really taken it to the next level, including some highly education institutions that have talked about it. Can you just talk about your program that you attended?
Yeah, I was kind of really lucky to get, I was offered a fellowship at Kellogg School of Management, which is at Northwestern University, which is in and outside of Chicago. And obviously a really great school. And I did this leadership program there where we got to meet all kinds of leaders, creative leaders, sports leaders, CEOs of massive companies like Campbell's Soups and things like that. But what was also really fascinating is like the interplay and the personalities of each person, right? Some of the leaders that we met were actually people who decided that they didn't want to be a leader. Like one of the examples was a guy who was the CEO of Sam's Club, which is massive, right? But owned by Walmart Corporation. Which meant that he was, and then I'm not sure if he took the job or if he never took it, but he was offered Walmart.com to run essentially the online part of Walmart, which put him in line to actually take over as CEO of Walmart someday.
Yes.
Youngish guy, had been a competitive swimmer, was always seen as being this kind of very confident person.
Alpha male, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. And then he told us and let us know that he had massive imposter syndrome. That every day leaving the house to go perform this function, he felt terrible. Like he just felt like this shouldn't be on his shoulders, that he wasn't the person for this role.
Right.
And it led to him doing various things that he wasn't proud of in terms of his own wellness.
Okay.
And he decided to resign from that and go start teaching and doing other things instead. So just the foresight of a program that was about leadership to include someone who could honestly admit to and share that their path was one that was applied on them by other people and external
Right.
forces, but not felt from within, was really powerful, compared to the head of the Northwestern football team, like this incredible football program,
Right.
who said that his salary was published. I think at the time he was earning $2 million a year.
Yeah.
And he's like the highest paid professor on campus.
Yes.
Has a staff or a team or a department of 200 plus people under his leadership, and had to kind of reconcile this fact that here he is at this massive academic institution.
Yes.
As the highest paid professor because he runs the football program, and what that causes in terms of his interactions with other academics
Right.
and professors on campus, who he competes with in the marketplace to get students to come to Northwestern and play
Yes.
football for Northwestern, and who he sees as his competition, because there's a lot of great football schools, but that he saw his competition as Stanford,
Right.
not as Alabama, Clemson,
Right.
Georgia, these traditional Ohio State, these incredible football schools, because Stanford was the only one that could offer the same combination of a really good football program.
Yes.
And really amazing stellar academics.
Right.
Right. We met with the leads of orchestras who would show us what would happen when they stopped conducting, and where the orchestra looks, and who they look to for leadership in the absence of the conductor.
That's an interesting experiment.
Yeah, which was super cool to watch. And like, it's the first violin, because the first violin is like kind of keeping the beat too.
Okay.
And then comparing how many notes a violinist plays to how many the timpanist, the drummer in the back, plays in the same piece of music, and how much they're paid per note, so to speak, as a result.
Right.
Or that the violinist's equipment might cost a couple $100,000 or more if they're using like a Stradivarius violin,
Okay.
compared to the trumpet player who could go to the local pawn shop
Right.
and pick up a trumpet for $45.
And be done. Right.
Right. So just the way that they broke down leadership, and the way these organizations stood, and the infrastructure, and whether they were based on hierarchies or meritocracies, etc.,
Right.
was really kind of amazing.
Yeah, and look, part of leadership, and I'm going to take it in a second, is I also believe people do want recognition at some level, even if they say that they don't. I just believe it's in our nature. You may disagree or not, but you, as we've mentioned now a number of times, you're not that well known in Australia, but you do have the chops. An Emmy Award, is that correct?
Yeah, our work has been nominated for several Emmys, in all different facets. It's like because like also people might not know that there are various types of Emmys, right?
Okay.
Like so commercial Emmys, Emmys for public service announcements and PSAs and other things as well. So advertising Emmys, and so we've been nominated for 7 now, and we've won 1. Yeah,
That's amazing.
it's pretty cool. You don't.
Do you take some personal satisfaction, at least, of being in that stratosphere?
It's more like personal. It's like in terms of just knowing that people are seeing the work,
Yes.
looking at it, identifying it as having a certain quality to it, and it kind of fuels you. And what's nice about it is that it usually comes a year or so after you're done with that project. officially.
Just the timing.
Because you've delivered it, it's come out, and then the awards, process takes a while. And so the team gets to have another chance, because you're so busy with the work and delivering the work, that when you get it done, you thank everybody and maybe have a dinner or something pre-pandemic. But you don't really get a chance to celebrate it or acknowledge or know what impact it might have. So to then have some recognition for it a year after, or 9 months after, or even 6 months after, you get to then thank everybody in a much more calm fashion, more organized fashion. They get to say that their work was elevated to a certain standpoint where it was. But there's a big lesson to be learned in this too. We never kept any awards in the office when we had offices pre-COVID, right? We didn't keep the awards in there. I kept them at home in the garage.
Oh my gosh.
And when COVID happened, I moved into the garage to work. And so suddenly I was surrounded by all these awards.
Wow.
And so then I started blurring the background, because I was like, oh, this is like, it's an unfair representation of what I'm trying to put out there.
Right.
But for us, it also serves a big tool for marketing.
Yeah.
Like, people know us from some of those awards, especially the early Cannes Lions. And companies would call us based on those awards, because they wanted to have, people who had that peerage or that provenance, that level of work, do the work for them.
Sure, and just tell everyone, what is the Cannes Lion?
So Cannes International Festival of Creativity is probably the best known festival that recognizes like advertising and commercials and things like that. And it's held in Cannes, France, obviously, once a year. And so the Cannes Lions are these incredible honors that are international. Like the Clios are US only.
Okay.
People might know them from after watching Mad Men and things like that. So winning those is awesome, but like the Cannes Lions is like international recognition.
Right. And getting a little bit more specific, are there any projects that you'd like to highlight for people that they maybe haven't seen, and also a place where maybe they could see them?
Yeah, I mean, as far as Australia goes, we had a film called For Tomorrow that came out in September of 2022. Was when we had the premiere for it, and it came out on Amazon Prime, which is available everywhere pretty much. And it was promoted by BTS, the K-pop group out of Korea, and it's narrated by Daisy Ridley, who people might know from the Star Wars franchise. And that's that film about grassroots innovators around the world who are taking matters into their own hands, and it's also about grassroots innovation generally. One of our heroes in the film, this Professor Anil Gupta, says we have to remember that minds on the margin are not marginal minds, that everyone has something to contribute, that just because you live in an area that's considered the global south doesn't mean you don't have knowledge that is, imperative or fundamental to solving that problem.
Sure.
So that's available. Black Boys, which is a really incredible film that I produced, directed by Sonia Lohman, is about how we look at the humanity of young black men in the US. We're currently working on a sequel to it, directed by a young black female filmmaker, B. Monet, who's pretty incredible. Alison Felix is in the film, who's like the most awarded US track athlete ever. She surpassed Carl Lewis's record at the Tokyo Olympics. And then, so those are ones to look out for sure. And then we have like a campaign that we did that I love, which is at morethanrobots.org.
Okay.
And it's for a STEM education nonprofit started by Dean Kamen, who's also an incredible leader. He's the guy who invented the Segway.
Right.
He invented the first portable kidney dialysis machine that meant that people who needed dialysis didn't need to be stuck in a hospital. But he's this incredible inventor, and he has this STEM nonprofit called FIRST, which is international. Over 600,000 kids participate. And our teams that we collaborated with did a lot of research about where kids feel a sense of belonging. We looked into growth mindset and all these different issues that kids are facing today. and then had honest conversations with them and their parents, and it ended up as this campaign called I Am More Than. And so if you go to morethanrobots.org and watch the 4-minute hero video, we think it's like pretty beautiful.
Incredible, incredible. Elliot, we can go on and on. If there were a couple of points, though, you would like, especially the Australians, to know to help them live really better, more impactful lives, what would they be? Big question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it comes down to the fact that there's no barriers to entry to any of this.
Right.
Right? It's like a lot of people wait for that perfect time or perfect moment to get started.
Which never happens.
Which rarely happens. And so, but just to know that there's always people who are at the same place you're at.
Yes.
Who want to be doing whatever it is that you're thinking of doing, who are looking for you to reach out, right, and get that ball rolling, or to contribute to whatever's going on at that time. It happened for us with filmmaking.
Right.
We found that you didn't really need a lot of money to start filmmaking. You needed someone with a camera, other people, or even not, because you can rent them, right? You needed people with time, energy, and application, right? And so it really comes back to those 4 Ps. If you have a passion for something, or identify someone else with a passion that you want to get behind, and you can apply it towards some sort of project that is tangible, then you can just get started. And then, money might come into it, money might come out of it, but there's no reason not to do it. There's just no reason not to do it.
Right.
Because the more you talk about it, and the more you get that ball rolling, the more people will come on board, and it becomes an inevitability. So I think that there's incredible power in that. It's like nothing that I've done has been stopped by commerce. We can change things up based on the amount of money coming into a project, but no project's ever been completely derailed by the fact that we didn't have money to do it.
Interesting. And is that also like one of the things of where, frankly, technology today, and maybe even social media, where you don't necessarily have to have billion-dollar budgets?
Oh, totally. I mean, we see it all the time, and the influencers are the greatest indicator of it, is that if you have something to say and there's an audience for what you're saying,
right,
then it's a marketplace.
Yes. Right?
And so whatever that is, for better or worse.
Right.
Right? And so we choose to use that for better.
Right.
But the technology is there. Everyone has it. It's highly democratized. And it's an equalizer in some fashion, right? Like there's some people jumping over infrastructure hurdles. I mean, really it's a case of have iPhone, will travel, right? Like that's about it. There's really no limitation. And you can accept anything as long as it's real, right? Like you can create anything.
Right.
It doesn't need to be perfect if it's honest.
Yeah.
It just needs to be the right message for the right audience. There's some people creating stuff that's super low fidelity, right? That's super low tech.
Yes.
But it reaches the right people who feel it authentically, who feel like you're speaking to them.
Yes.
And that's enough for that project. It doesn't need to have shiny production values and a slick editor. Right. It could just be a heart-to-heart, one person to another.
Right.
But that's like something we look at every time a project comes on board, is like, okay, who's our audience for this? Because a lot of people want to appeal to everyone, and maybe that's the wrong approach. Because maybe you appeal to nobody or to the wrong people, right? Like you always have to look at like, what's the objective? Do you want to change behavior, or do you want to just create awareness? If you want to create awareness, with whom, right? Like, and so I kind of use an example. Like if you create airplanes, like if you physically build airplanes, like Airbus or Boeing,
right?
We don't need to know, as consumers, you don't need to create an ad for Boeing telling us how beautiful Boeing is. Right? Like we don't get on a plane asking if it's a Boeing or an Airbus. Right? So really you're trying to appeal to the, 50 people in the world who buy airplanes.
Yes.
Right? Like however many airlines there are, there's 50 of them or whatever, and they buy airplanes. So if you're going to create content around it, why not create personalized content for each of those 50 people? Maybe that's the right thing to do.
Okay.
You know, but so depending on what the project is, depending on the behavior, depending on the awareness, depending on what you're trying to achieve, you just have to have the right product for the right people.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I'd even take it a step further and say it's even easier in a niche to maybe have some impact than it is to have something in a mass market product.
I'm just curious because the sun has dropped quite considerably since we started, whether you are in fact visible in this video.
Well,
thank the iPhone.
I don't know. Hopefully the iPhone does work, but on that note, maybe we will conclude the interview now because it has gone on a while. The sun has set here in beautiful Los Angeles. Elliot, thank you so much. You know, we have known each other for so long, but it is incredible to finally sit down with you.
Yeah, it's awesome to chat with you, Greg.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers, mate.
Bye-bye.